Imagine standing on a remote, windswept island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, staring up at a massive stone face that weighs 80 tons. You are on Easter Island, and you are looking at a moai. For centuries, these statues have stood as silent witnesses to one of history's most chilling mysteries. When the first Europeans arrived in 1722, they found a barren landscape with no trees taller than 10 feet and a population living in squalor, trapped on a rock they couldn't escape because they no longer had the wood to build seaworthy canoes. But those giant statues told a different story. They told of a once thriving, complex civilization with the engineering prowess to move mountains. What happened? How does a society go from building monuments that defy belief to a state of total cannibalism and collapse? For decades, historians and archaeologists scratched their heads, but one man decided to look for a pattern. His name is Jared Diamond, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and scientist who spent years studying why some societies vanish while others survive. He identified 5 specific warning signs, 5 pillars of collapse that almost every failed civilization in history has shared. And as we walk through these 5 signs today, I want you to ask yourself one uncomfortable question. How many of these boxes is our modern world currently checking? Because the scary thing about collapse is that from the inside, it often looks like progress until the very moment the floor falls out. Jared Diamond's first sign of a looming collapse is environmental damage. This is the one we think we understand, but Diamond's perspective is much more granular. He looks at the literal foundation of a society, its soil, its water, and its forests. Take the Greenland Norse, for example. When the Vikings settled in Greenland around the year 980, they tried to live like they did in Norway. They cleared the thin layer of topsoil to make room for cattle, but the Greenland environment was fragile. Without trees to break the wind and roots to hold the earth, the soil simply blew away. They were destroying their ability to feed themselves before they even realized the damage was permanent. Now, compare that to our modern world. We aren't just losing topsoil, we're depleting aquifers that take thousands of years to refill and polluting the very air we breathe. Diamond argues that a society collapses when it consumes its natural capital faster than that capital can regenerate. It's like living off a massive inheritance. You feel rich every day you spend that money, right up until the day the bank account hits zero. The tragedy of the Norse was that they couldn't see the end coming because they were too busy trying to maintain their status as European farmers in a land that was never meant for farming. But environmental damage is rarely the only factor. That brings us to the second sign: climate change. Now, Diamond isn't just talking about the man-made warming we discussed today. He's talking about any significant shift in climate that a society isn't prepared to handle. History is littered with the corpses of civilizations that were caught off guard by a long-term change in the weather. The classic Maya are the poster child for this. For centuries, they built incredible pyramids and sprawling cities in the jungles of Central America. They relied on a complex system of reservoirs to survive the dry season. But then, the climate shifted. A series of mega-droughts hit the region. Because the Maya had already pushed their environment to the limit, deforesting the hills and overworking the land, they had no margin for error. The climate didn't just change, it broke a system that was already stretched too thin. When we look at our modern world, we see a climate that is becoming more volatile, not just warmer. We see agricultural belts shifting and sea levels rising. Diamond's point is that climate change is often the trigger that sets off a chain reaction in a society that is already vulnerable. It's the shove that sends the person standing on the edge of the cliff over the side. The third sign is one that feels particularly relevant in our current geopolitical climate: hostile neighbors. Diamond observed that very few societies exist in a vacuum. most have enemies. Usually, a strong society can keep its enemies at bay through military might or diplomacy. But when a society begins to weaken due to the first two signs, environmental degradation or climate stress, its enemies notice. The Roman Empire didn't fall just because of barbarians. It fell because it became too expensive and structurally weak to defend its massive borders against those barbarians. When the internal systems start to fail, the cost of defense becomes unbearable. Today, we live in a hyper-connected world where a conflict on one side of the planet can destabilize the economy on the other. We see traditional power structures being challenged and borders becoming flashpoints. Diamond warns that a society's ability to defend itself is directly tied to its internal health. If the foundation is rotting, the walls will eventually crumble under the pressure of outside forces. But what if your neighbors aren't hostile? What if they are your friends? This leads to the fourth sign, the loss of trading partners. This is perhaps the most overlooked part of Diamond's thesis. Almost every civilization relies on trade for essential resources. The Bronze Age collapse is a perfect example. Around 1200 BC, the entire Mediterranean world went into a tailspin. Why? Because the trade routes that moved tin and copper, the ingredients for bronze, were disrupted. When one kingdom fell, it created a domino effect. If you rely on a neighbor for your food, your fuel, or your technology, and that neighbor collapses or decides to stop trading, you are in deep trouble. In our modern globalized economy, we have taken this to the extreme. Our phones are made with minerals from Africa, designed in California, and assembled in China. Our food travels thousands of miles. We are more interdependent now than at any point in human history. Diamond's warning is clear. Interdependence is a massive strength during the good times, but it is a catastrophic vulnerability during a collapse. If the global supply chain snaps, how many cities could actually feed themselves for more than a week? This brings us to the final and arguably most important sign of a society about to collapse, the society's response to its problems. This is the human element. Diamond noticed that some societies see the problems coming and change their behavior. They adapt. Others, however, double down on the very behaviors that are destroying them. Why? Usually it's because of a disconnect between the elites and the common people. In a collapsing society, the people in power are often insulated from the consequences of their decisions. The Mayan kings didn't go hungry when the drought started. They had the largest granaries. They continued to demand more labor for their monuments and more taxes for their wars, even as their people starved. Because the elites feel the pain last, they have the least incentive to change the system. They focus on short-term goals, staying in power, accumulating wealth, while the long-term survival of the civilization is sacrificed. Diamond calls this irrational behavior. It's the tendency for humans to stay the course even when the course is leading directly into an abyss. Think about our modern world. We have the data. We know about the soil, the water, the climate, and the fragility of our trade networks. We have the technology to change course. But do we have the political and social will? Or are our leaders too insulated by wealth and power to make the hard choices required for long-term survival? Diamond's 5 signs aren't just a way to look at the past. They are a diagnostic tool for the present. When you look at the Moai on Easter Island, you aren't just looking at a mystery, you are looking at a warning. The man who cut down the last tree on that island probably knew it was the last tree, but he did it anyway, perhaps because he needed the wood for a statue, or because he was competing with a neighbor, or because he simply couldn't imagine a world without trees. He was part of a system that had lost the ability to save itself. Are we there? It's easy to feel a sense of doom when looking at these 5 pillars, but Diamond also offers a glimmer of hope. Unlike the Greenland Norse or the classic Maya, we are the first civilization in history that actually understands why societies collapse. We have the records of the past to guide us. We can see the patterns. Collapse is not an inevitability, it is a choice. We can choose to protect our natural capital. We can choose to build resilient local systems that aren't entirely dependent on fragile global chains. We can choose to demand that our leaders prioritize the next century over the next election cycle. The history of human civilization is a story of incredible resilience, but it is also a story of spectacular failure. The choice of which chapter we are currently writing belongs to us. If you found this deep dive into the mechanics of history's end useful, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We explore the stories that define our past and the forces that shape our future, because the more we understand how we got here, the better chance we have of staying here. Thank you for watching.